Hi. Okay, this is the second chapter I'm recording today. Um, this one does have an angst warning. Um, that hurt slash comfort tag. It actually decides to pull some weight here of hurt. And I'm gonna say what I think. There was only a reference for one of the three villains, Mammoth in the background there. So I used that, and I got lazy and didn't want to look up the other two in the fic. You know, so I didn't feel like looking around for those two. I hope you like the little silhouette of Izuku. I got the point across. But anyway, that's enough of me talking. This is Black Cats with Bad Luck and So Are You Kid by Holly, Chapter 26. The car was silent as the chauffeur drove them. The man sat on his phone, scrolling through gossip pages and magazines to see if anything was going on. Still, nothing was being said. It pissed him off, and everyone in the car could feel his displeasure. The five men behind him and the driver of the car shifted nervously as his angry aura continued to glow. He couldn't sit still. The world needed to know who he and his people were, and that bastard who assisted in arresting almost all of them and made one of his men talk would pay. He scrolled back over the messages he had gotten from one of his people called Mirth. A silly name, but the man had proclaimed he had captured a child who was associated with the man who pissed him off so greatly. The best part was the young man had been touched by another one of his people's quirks. The one that made the bastard made talk. Cat. The ability to make any person turn into a cat relative to how many years old they were. It had been almost 2 weeks since the battle, when Cat had been taken and the boy disappeared. 14 days, and the boy was 16. He looked at the files Worth had collected. It was the finger breaker kid from the sports festival. Powerful as shit. It probably mastered more of his quirk by now. Dangerous, but for now harmless, in the small black fur he was trapped in. The man looked at the picture once more, seeing the small black cat inside a cage, sleeping off a drug. It looked like a small kitten, but the man knew so much better. He chuckled. The group behind him in the back seat shifted nervously where they sat. He huffed at their shyness and looked back up to the road. When will we be arriving? The driver shifted and spoke up, their voice quiet but loud enough to hear. In about an hour and a half, sir. The man nodded and smiled, grinning. Good. Making an hour and 15. The driver nodded and began to speed up. The men leaned back in their seat and looked back at his phone, looking through the files on the man who had made one of his most loyal talk and had organized an attack on one of his most profitable and successful compounds. The attack took a third of his people, profit, and territory, and the man who had done this to him would pay. He was sad the child was involved, but sadly anyone now involved with the underground emo bitch would have to pay the price. Everyone would know what happens when you mess with the Harbingers. Azuku woke up groggy and sick. He shifted under the thin shirt he was given and shivered. Felix, a small fever began to form. He heard rustling outside and fast steps walking around outside the box. He shifted his head up to look through the hole in the bottom of the box, not having much energy to do anything else. He didn't see much from his position, but he saw feet walking past. Back and forth they went, excited and nervous, muttering, following behind the smaller pair of feet. He elected to ignore it, his head thudding in tune with his heartbeats. He tried to curl up more under the shirt, but he couldn't adjust with his hands. He didn't trust himself not to hurl if he brought his head up. He whined softly and brought his tail up to hold under his paw. Not quite a stuffed animal, but it would work for the purpose of comfort, even if it was slight. After a few minutes of shuffling, he heard an excited giggle approach the box. He looked up as the lid was lifted and saw the edited but kind of blurry face of Mirth, who grinned down at him, though the man's expression changed immediately when he saw the state of the young cat. The box lid was completely removed, and the man's face shifted from excited and nervous to angry and nervous. Hey, kid, get up. He reached in and pushed on Izuku's side, and Izuku let out a small, indignant meow in response. Ow! Ow! The moment was uncomfortable and allowing cold air to rush under the shirt he was covered with. The man growled and poked him harder, beginning to speak again before being stopped by Mammoth, who spoke up behind him. He's sick. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. He can't be sick. Boss wants him beat, not dead. If he's sick, the boss can't beat him. So, their boss was coming? That was worrying. What did they want with him? Zugu's thoughts raced as he was suddenly lifted by large yet familiar hands. Mammoth brought Izuku up to his face, looking the young boy deep in his eyes. Izuku flicked his tail, too tired to be frightened, and the man sighed. He walked over to the cat food and lifted it up. Setting the kibble down on the table, he opened the bag. Inside, the kibble looked fine. Mammoth grunted and sniffed the contents. With a grunt of surprise, he dumped the bag onto the table. Murph yelled and was ignored by the larger man. Inside the bag was the answer to why Izuku was so sick. A dead and decaying mouse sat within the kibble, inconspicuously waiting to be found. Mammoth stepped aside to let Murph see who grunted inside. Okay, probably should have checked the food when I took it out of that dumpster. Mammoth grunted angrily. The food was shoved off the table, and Izuku was laid in the man's hand, with his head leaning down towards the table. Mirth asked what was happening. Once again, when ignored, as Mammoth whispered an apology and gently pushed on Izuku's stomach. A wave of nausea rolled over Izuku as he threw up. The sensation was painful, and it didn't stop until much of his stomach had emptied. Izuku laid there panting while he was done, and Mammoth lifted up away from the now puke-covered table. Mammoth walked away from the angry Mirth, continuing to ignore the man. Izuku once again laid on the man's bed, but on his blanket this time. A bowl of water was set beside him, and Mammoth gestured it. Drink. I have some medicine, but you need water first. Izuku sighed and shakily sat up, though Mammoth took a large finger and placed it on his side, helping him sit up and steady himself. Once Izuku could sit on his own, the man walked away, soon returning with a stick of jerky. He ripped a chunk of the meat off and ripped it into tiny bits, before setting it on a plastic bag the jerky came in. He also crushed a pill, spreading it into the meat, before gently sliding it over to Izuku. The young boy didn't want to eat, but the man insisted, and Izuku didn't feel like being force-fed if the man decided he was going to make him eat. So Izuku took a deep breath and ate the cheap beef jerky. It tasted sour in his mouth, probably because of the medicine, but also now his changed taste bud. He grimaced, but ate as much as the meat he could, before backing away from it slightly. Mammoth smiled and nodded, bringing the water back over to Izuku, who drank a little bit more before lying his head down. While his headache was in full swing now, the ache in his stomach and fever had gone away, leaving him with cold sweats and soreness. Mammoth lifted up and held him close, gently blowing his warm breath onto the boy. Izuku heard someone clear their throat from the door, and Izuku cracked an eye to see Mirth standing there, glaring at Mammoth. So, now you acknowledge me? Mammoth grunted and went back to try to warm Izuku. Murph stomped forward, and Mammoth stepped back, clutching Izuku close to his chest and away from the smaller man. Mirth walked until Mammoth's back was pressed against the wall. It came up right in front of the burly man. You are being disloyal to the cause, Mammoth. Must I remind you where you stand? Blood sighed and shook his head, much to the pleasure of Mirth. But it wasn't enough for the smaller, who forcefully grabbed Bea's hands, which were hiding Izuku, and pulled. Give me the kid. Mammoth shook his head, looking down at Izuku, conflicted and scared. It was obvious the man didn't want to give Izuku to the other, but he also wanted to follow the orders of the smaller man. The man became more insistent, tugging harder. You dare disobey me, Mammoth? Mammoth grunted and shook his head, his whole body shaking. Izuku could feel it, but he could do nothing but lay in the palm of the large man. Mirth eventually got tired of this, and his hand turned flat. He raised it up and slashed it across Mammoth's arm. The larger man called out and jerked, but never dropped the Zuku. Instead, his grip on the boy became tighter, but not suffocating. Zuku smelled blood suddenly, and Mirth grunted. Give me the child, or I will continue to use force until you do, and I will make sure the child feels it too. Mammoth paused at the mention of Izuku. The threat stood in his mind, and shakily he handed the small boy over to Mirth, who lifted the black cat by the scruff. Izuku called out, the rough housing rough on his frail body. Mammoth looked at the young boy with panic clear in his eyes, but it was Mirth's turn to ignore the other, and he walked out of the room with no further instructions than to patch himself up. Before walking back towards the box Suzuki was being kept inside, it dropped him in. Suzuki landed with a thump, and luckily onto the shirts he was gifted by Mammoth, and looked up at Mirth, who grinned malically. Night night, you little fucking shit. The lid of the box, and Izuku was once again left alone in the dark, cold and musty box. He shuffled around in the dim light, adjusting the shirts he had been given so they made a nest of sorts he could curl under. The medicine and good food seemed to be helping. He was no longer dizzy and sick. While his head throbbed, his leg cried out with each movement, and his body ached. He felt much better. He curled up under one of the shirts and sighed. He watched the whole of the box for any sign of either man. He saw nothing for a long time. As he was trying to go to sleep, he heard voices, a lot of them, but Mirth stood out the most. After a few moments, a group of people entered the room where he was being kept. Izuku curled up tighter under the shirt. This must be the boss Mirth was so anxious about. A deep yet smooth voice spoke up, walking closer to the box. So where's is the little rascal? I was told he's being kept in a cage, but I see no cage nor no cat. Mirth chuckled almost nervously. We had an incident. Sadly, the cage was destroyed. The young boy got his leg caught in the bars, and Mammoth here panicked. So we had to relocate the boy. A set of footsteps walked over to the box and lifted the cover. Mirth reached inside the beast and pulled out Izuku by his scruff. Izuku whined uncomfortably as he was lifted high in the air, presented to the group. There were 7 new people in total, but one of them stood out the most was in the front, watching him with a calculating glare. Izuku knew this man was the boss, not just of the compound, but the entire group, which componed they had raided part of, the Harbingers. The man was tall, lithe, and thin. He had bright red hair and hazel brown eyes. He had known for his cruelty and his skill in a fight. His main reason such a disorganized and unpopular group of villains had succeeded so well. The man sauntered closer to the Zugu, inspecting the other boy carefully. Zuko tried to curl into himself to make himself smaller, which only served to make the man grin. Zuko watched as the man poked at his wrapped leg, chuckling softly. At least you left me some other things to break. But I think this kid is already used to having his bones broken. The finger breaker from the UA Sports Festival, ladies and gentlemen. Zuko Midoriya. Oh, Zuko is fucked with the capital F. He curled deeper into himself as the group of people behind the bus stared in an array of emotion, awe, amusement, nervousness, fear. But Zuko's gaze eventually traveled to the burly man who stood behind them all, towering over the small crowd. His gaze was full of nothing but pure fear and panic. And Zuko matched his gaze tenfold. He prayed his teachers would hurry and find him soon. He closed his eyes as the large hand enveloped his vision. It took him from Murph's grasp. The two men got called not a day later. Shota had been pacing the kitchen while his husband cleaned. As soon as the phone rang, Hisashi rushed over and grabbed it before the second ring even had a chance to go off. Hisashi stopped and looked over at the other man, who was talking to someone on the other end. With a nod, the blonde hung up and ran to their bedroom phone and ran to their bedroom, grabbing the gear he'd left when he wasn't working. It was uncomfortable. Shota quickly did the same, double-checking the house security and their other cat, Sushi, who had not moved from the couch where Zuko used to lay, and the blanket he was curled on, with Eri during the weekends he was here. The man sighed sadly and pet the cat, who leaned into his hand with a soft purr. But once the blonde was rushing out the bedroom, he bid the tabby goodbye and followed the man out of the house, locking the door behind him. They rushed to the car and clambered inside before taking off. Shota took this time to ask what was going on to the other man, smiled. They've got him. They found him, Sho. We're going to hear the plan and save Midoriya. Shota smiled and felt the weight fall from his chest, but another replaced it. That meant the boss, a very dangerous man, was near a defenseless and small Izuku. He was probably being targeted. He sighed and looked forward, trying to focus on finding the young kid, hopefully unhurt and alive. Okay, that's this chapter. Um, I think the next chapter is pretty bad with how it gets for the Zuko. I don't remember though. My memory's a bit spotty, guys. Okay, stretch. Now, I'll be honest, I forgot the description. So, we have two random villains here that are in the frame with Mammoth, yep, yep, that's definitely after. Lovely. I still don't know what this box looks like. I've been mentally, like, thinking it's one of the metal boxes that you have, like a rusted metal box that you would put, like, metal equipment in. That's what I've been mentally picturing it as. Why not draw Rust? Rust is a pain to draw, and I don't feel like it. Anyway, I'm gonna end this here. Bye!